Hi, everybody, and welcome to the webinar on Policy 101 to help you all prepare for the 2019 Public Policy Forum at NAEYC. We are so excited to be welcoming all of you to join us this year for the Policy Forum. We can't wait to have everybody in DC with us for an exciting and invigorating time together. In the past, we've done these webinars to help everybody get on the same page with all of the different federal programs, acronyms, committees, so that everybody who is coming in, whether it's your first time or whether this is your 25th time or whether you're on the Hill all the time, this way everybody has some shared knowledge about what the different programs are, what they mean. And so when we go through the talking points at Public Policy Forum, you guys are a little bit more familiar with each of the programs and why we are talking about them. So what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through introducing all of the federal programs, congressional committees, administration agendas at a high level to promote the shared knowledge base. We're going to make some connections between these federal programs and why we're talking about them, what our vision is for high quality early childhood education, and essentially we're going to reduce the number of acronyms that y'all don't recognize. Sometimes in DC, we have a little bit of an alphabet soup, and so we want to make sure that everybody knows what these programs are and what we're talking about. These are some of the federal programs that support young children, families, and educators. We are going to go through each of them today, albeit briefly, so that everybody has a little bit of time talking about them. You can see the programs range from childcare to healthcare to food support and nutrition support, the various ways that we support kids and families. Looking at the screen now, thinking about some of these acronyms and whether or not you know them. There will be no quiz, so we're just going to walk through all of the different programs now. In addition to which, we'll touch upon the who, where some of the responsibilities lie for the committees and departments, sort of where the jurisdiction is. What we talk about when we talk about, okay, if we're looking at childcare, who in Congress is responsible for making sure that the policies make sense? Who's responsible for the funding? How does this work? So there are lots of different committees. We'll walk through some of the key committees. When you guys are on the Hill for your Hill Day on Tuesday, knowing which members are on which committee is a really important part of what you'll be talking about and what you'll be doing when you're up on the Hill. So making that connection now is super important. We're going to start with one of our most fundamental and cherished programs, CCDBG. This is the acronym for the Child Care and Development Block Grant. Basically, when we talk about child care, this is the largest federal funding stream. This is often what we're talking about. CCDBG is a program that helps low-income families access child care by providing states with funding to address affordability and quality. Essentially, it funds the child care subsidy programs in your state. It was created in 1990, and it was last authorized in 2014. This was a big deal. You all participated in a lot of that. It was a very exciting time. Basically, it did a lot of work to improve regulations, to increase quality. What they did at the time, however, was to improve the program, but they did not exactly provide the additional funding for states to help implement the new requirements. That's something that we've been working on for many years since the reauthorization, and we had an enormous success last year in 2018, which many of you were part of, in getting additional funding for the program. We'll talk about that in a minute and extensively at the Public Policy Forum this year. In CCDBG, state plans are created every 3 years. So all of your states have a state plan that sort of outlines how they're going to achieve the goals of the program. They talk about how they're going to meet the requirements for health and safety regulations, the eligibility requirements for families, training and professional development, licensing and monitoring, and opportunities for quality improvement. CCDBG serves about 1.4 million children. Now, the numbers will have likely increased once the funding was increased last year, but there is a data lag, so we don't know exactly how many children are receiving CCDBG right now. What we do know is that the vast majority of children do not receive the child care assistance for which they are eligible due to a lack of funding. CCDBG is dramatically underfunded. And for many years, the funding was going down. So when we looked over the decade from about 2006 to 2015, over 300,000 fewer children received CCDBG funded childcare over the course of that decade. So we know funding was going down, fewer children were being served. Most kids do not receive the assistance that they are eligible for. However, in 2018, CCDBG received the largest funding increase in history. So it's an additional $2.4 billion per year. You may remember receiving, say, an email or two about the excitement around this. And if you were with us at Public Policy Forum last year, you remember going up to the Hill to fight for this funding and win it. It was a very exciting time. If you were not part of this, or if you just want to relive it, you can see the story about how the funding increase came to be. This is the link that takes you to a video that we did with our friends at National Women's Law Center and class to tell the story about this funding increase. You can also learn more about CCDBG and childcare at the link below. All of these programs we go into in more detail on our website. You can go to the policy pages and sort of explore some more details. We're going to talk about ESSA. This is pronounced ESSA, or ESSA, depends on what you feel like. ESSA stands for the Every Student Succeeds Act. It is the newest version of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is ESEA. It's not really usually referred to that way. This ESSA contains an elevated focus on connections between early childhood and K-12 systems. Many of you, if you know it and if you think about it, will think about the preschool development grants. These are what's known as PDGs. Preschool development grants, many of your states had them over the past several years. What is in ESSA on PDGs are a different program. They're just called the same name, which is confusing for a lot of folks, but it's the way it is. These PDGs are designed to help states and communities plan, coordinate, and expand early childhood education programs for children birth through 5. Many of your states applied for and recently received preschool development grant funding for this planning year. We'll talk more about PDGs at Public Policy Forum, but when we reference it, this is the program that we're talking about. It is connected to ESSA. ESSA overall is composed of what's called 9 titles. So you'll hear a lot of conversation about titles when we talk about legislation at the federal level. 2 of the more important titles in ESSA are Title I, which most of you will have heard of as it relates to public schools. So a lot of public schools are Title I public schools. That has to do with the funding they receive to provide instructional and comprehensive services primarily for low-income children and the other children who attend that school. There's a formula for figuring out which schools are Title I schools. Title I is also used funding-wise to provide early childhood education services. It is an allowable use of the funding. We'll talk more about what that means and why Title I is so important. Title II is also super important. It is what supports the professional development for teachers and leaders. And so a lot of the Title II programs are what we care about from a birth to age 8 perspective that includes K-3 educators. For more information on ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, you can also check out NAEYC's website. Lots of our partners also do great work on ESSA and in the K-3 space, so we encourage you to feel free to explore. HEA. HEA stands for the Higher Education Act. You'll be hearing a lot about HEA at Public Policy Forum this year because the Higher Education Act is up for reauthorization. That means that it was originally created in 1965. There were a lot of things that were created in 1965 or right about then. It was last comprehensively authorized many years ago, and it is time for an update. In order to get to an update, folks who do not necessarily agree on how the higher education system should work are going to need to come to some compromises about what a reauthorization would look like. HEA governs higher education programs and student loan programs. It administers federal grants and loans, including Pell Grants, which many of you will be familiar with. HEA is made up of 8 titles. 2 of the ones that we care a lot about are Title II, which, like Title II and ESSA, governs teacher quality provisions. So Title II is different from ESSA to HEA, but they both have to do with teachers. Title IV is also important in HEA. It governs student aid. We have a lot of priorities that we'll talk much more about related to HEA and how we're supporting students and early childhood educators in particular, both current and prospective students, so that we're really able to support their access to affordable, high quality, higher education that gets them the skills and knowledge and competencies they need to deliver on the promise of early childhood education. You can learn more about HEA, again, on our website and via lots of our partners, and we're looking forward to talking much more about higher education at Public Policy Forum. The CDC-TC is not the same as the CCDBG or the same as the CTC. Feel free to take that in for a second. CDC-TC is the Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit, sometimes referred to as the Child Care Tax Credit. What it does is most of the programs that we talk about are on the spending side, and we'll talk more about what that means. CDC-TC is a tax credit, so it is on the tax side of the child care question. CDC-TC offsets a portion of eligible families' child care expenses. It is the only tax credit in the federal code that is designed specifically to address child care affordability. And we make a special note here to say that the child tax credit, the CTC, is a different credit, which is also really important. When we were doing some tax reform in the past couple of years and thinking about tax reform in the federal context, there was a lot of confusion around the fact that there are 2 different tax credits. We had to clear up a lot of misinformation in the media and on the Hill. It's confusing. But we really focus on the CDC-TC because it is specifically about childcare. We can talk much more about what the tax code can and cannot do when it comes to improvements in childcare affordability, access, and quality. But there are things that CDC-TC can do to improve affordability for some families in particular. Currently, the CDC-TC is what's called non-refundable. So all tax credits are some combination of refundable and or non-refundable. Non-refundable just means basically that it doesn't help our nation's lowest income families. That's a problem for when we're thinking about who needs and struggles with affordability, although this is childcare affordability is certainly an issue that affects families up and down the income levels. What happens right now is that some families are able to claim a credit of a certain amount of money for 1 child or 2 children. A lot of families, about 13% of families in 2016 benefited from the CDC-TC. We are continuing to look at ways to improve the tax credit, even as we also talk about ways to improve the child tax credit. We will talk a little bit more about tax credits at Public Policy Forum, particularly for some of you who have members of Congress who are particularly interested in thinking about how to address affordability from the perspective of the tax code. If you want more information on this, we encourage you to check out A, our website, and B, the America for Early Ed newsletters. When we were talking a lot about tax code and tax reform, had a lot of information on CDC-TC, on CTC, and sort of how this worked and didn't work in the context of tax reform. We're going to go quickly through a couple of more programs, including IDEA, is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. They're both Part B and Part C of IDEA, which are the most important pieces for thinking about early childhood education, dealing with children beginning at age 3 and dealing with infants and toddlers with disability and early intervention. So a lot of folks who work on EI, which is another acronym for early intervention, will be very familiar with Part B and Part C of IDEA. There are about 360,000 kids nationwide served through early intervention. This is an important program that is always part of when we ask for additional funding for programs from childcare to Head Start. We always include Part B and Part C in IDEA, and they're an important part of the early childhood education system and structure. We've directed you to some of our friends at DEC and the ECTA Center to learn more about IDEA Part B and Part C. Head Start. Many of you come from Head Start settings, work with your Head Start teachers, work with your Head Start state collaboration directors. Head Start and Early Head Start help families whose income falls below the federal poverty line, the two-generation model that provides comprehensive services. Many of you may have seen this week, Ed Ziegler was in the news having passed away this week. He was known as the father of Head Start, so we're all feeling very close to Head Start and to its origins and to the incredible benefits and impact that it has had on thousands and thousands of children over many, many years. Head Start focuses on children ages 3 to 5, also originated in 1965, an important date. Early Head Start focuses on infant, toddlers, and pregnant women. It was actually established in 1998. Head Start was also last reauthorized in 2007, and they have been busy with many updating of program performance standards. These were updated in 2016 for the first time since 1975. Head Start serves about 730,000 children ages 3 to 5 and another 150,000 in early Head Start. Most children, like with CCDBG, most eligible children do not have access still to Head Start and early Head Start. We are constantly working with Congress to increase investments in Head Start. And we encourage you, a couple of weeks ago, the New York Times published a great front page article on Head Start and the improvements that they have made with bipartisan support from Congress. We really encourage folks to check that out. To learn more about Head Start via NAEYC or, of course, via our friends at National Head Start Association. CHIP is the Children's Health Insurance Program. You'll see some of these programs that we're talking about now are in green headings on your screen. They are sort of the support for children and families' well-being that really allows them to take advantage of early learning programs. As many of you say, children are not menus. They do not come in pieces. All of these programs work together to support the health and well-being of children. CHIP is a federal state partnership program that provides health coverage options for families who earn too much to qualify for Medicaid, but too little to afford other coverage. It was created in 1997 with strong bipartisan support, and it was part of an enormous fight last year in the fall. We came to many of you to support the reauthorization of CHIP as its funding was running out. In the end, due to a lot of really great advocacy from certainly folks in the early childhood community, but far beyond as well, CHIP was ultimately reauthorized for 10 years, which was a great relief to many in the states who needed that kind of consistency. CHIP provides states with a set amount of funding. It serves about 9 million children, give or take, and the folks at Georgetown have had wonderful information on CHIP, and we encourage you to check out their resources for more. TANF, T-A-N-F, is the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. TANF is welfare. It replaced what was known as the Aid to Families with Dependent Children, AFDC, in 1996 during welfare reform. TANF provides cash assistance, job training, and other services to low-income families via block grants to states. And one of the things that they did in welfare reform was establish work requirements and time limits and created that link between working parents and childcare. TANF, as many of you who work in the states know, is a deeply important part of childcare assistance in your state. In 2000, $4 billion worth of TANF funds were used for childcare. In 2015, that number had declined to $2.6 billion. This is an issue that a lot of states are experiencing. We will talk a little bit more about TANF and the way in which childcare is funded. Class does an amazing job thinking about TANF and the connection to childcare. We encourage you to check out their website for more on the links between TANF and childcare. CACSP is the Child and Adult Care Food Program. Those of you who are in the family childcare world will be very familiar with CACSP, which is a huge support for family childcare in particular, as well as those in childcare centers. CACSP pays for meals and snacks for eligible children. It provides training, technical assistance, and support. It serves over 4 million children every day and has been an enormous support and important support for many child care centers and homes. For more information, we encourage you to check out details from our friends at FRAC, which is the Food Resource Action Center, and our friends at the National Association for Family Child Care, who do an enormous amount of work on CACSP. SNAP. It's funny, sometimes they're words, sometimes they're just letters. The fun of acronyms never stops. SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as food stamp. SNAP delivers more nutrition assistance to low-income children than any other federal program. It lifts millions of families and their children out of poverty and has long-lasting benefits for children. Interestingly, 2/3 of SNAP benefits go to families with children. SNAP is an enormously important support. It shouldn't really be controversial to think that children should have food. So we continue to fight for SNAP and for investments in SNAP and to make sure that it is not tied into questions of work requirements and other things that make it more difficult for families to access food for their children. We encourage you to check out more information via our friends at FRAC, who have done just incredible work on supporting and maintaining SNAP for families. Medicaid. Medicaid also enacted in 1965, and maybe we will do a quiz on the number of programs that were enacted in 1965. Medicaid was created at the same time as Medicare. It has guaranteed federal funding. This makes it different from something like childcare. We will talk more about the differences between how programs are funded at public policy forums. Medicaid, if you're eligible for Medicaid, you get it. So there's no people who are not eligible who don't get it, like there is in childcare and Head Start. It is not mandatory to have funding for childcare and Head Start. It is mandatory to have funding for Medicaid. There are minimum requirements, and states sort of have options for Medicaid. You've seen a lot about Medicaid expansion in the news, sort of who's eligible for access to Medicaid. It is the largest source of federal funds for states, and it covers significant percentages of young children, families, and educators. Medicaid is critical to children and families' well-being, and it is an enormously important part of how kids receive health care to make sure that they're healthy and able to participate in early learning programs and succeed in all that they need to succeed in. We encourage you to check out the information from our friends at Georgetown for more information on Medicaid. With all of these programs going on, there are some shared responsibilities. And the question for early childhood educators as we're advocating for these programs are, who's in charge here? Is Buzz Lightyear asking that kind of question, for those of you who are not looking at this on slides. So the question is really, who does what? Early childhood educators understand the importance of building relationships in their work with children and families. And when it comes to being an advocate, building these relationships with policymakers is just as important. We've done some work, many of you have seen the policy scans, where we ask advocates in states to sort of think about who owns what issues, who's responsible for what. And we say sometimes we almost called that resource barking up the wrong tree, because sometimes we go to the wrong place to get something done. It is important for us to understand and figure out who is responsible for addressing our issues. Where do decisions get made about the different programs, policy, financing, oversight? Where are these decisions being made so that we're talking to the right people at the right time? I'm going to talk very briefly about committees, which is sort of how Congress is set up, basically. Congress has a number of different committees. This refers to a subgroup of elected officials who take on specific areas. The Senate has standing committees. The House has standing committees. They all then add committees on a regular basis. The way each committee works is every committee has a chairperson and what's called a ranking member. The chairperson is the leader of the party who has the majority. The ranking member is the leader of the committee for the party who is in the minority on that body. So at the moment, we have a split majority in Congress. The Senate is majority Republican. The House is majority Democrat. So you need to pay attention when you're visiting to whether or not who is in charge, who has the chairperson, and who has the ranking member. Each party assigns its own members to committees, and each committee then distributes the members among subcommittees. So yes, many of the committees also have subcommittees that get into the nitty-gritty issues of dealing with some of the things that matter the most to early childhood educators. Committees have their own staff. When you're up on the Hill for Hill Day, you might meet with committee staff in addition to the personal staff of the members of Congress, and we can talk more about that at Policy Forum. I'm going to go very briefly through some of the key committees, just so when we say these words at Policy Forum, they trigger something in your brain to know what it is that we're talking about. The first key committees are, this is the Senate committee on the top and the House committee on the bottom. The Senate committee is called the HELP committee. HELP stands for Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. The Senate HELP committee has jurisdiction over healthcare, education, employment, and retirement policies. And they are responsible for legislation such as ESSA and CCDBG. These are the things that we've just talked about, as well as the Higher Education Act. That is why HELP is such a critical committee for us. When you're visiting, you'll see which of your members are on the HELP committee, and particularly on the Children and Families subcommittee. We'll want to talk with them a lot about our issues, and they will be particularly interested in hearing what we have to say. On the House side, the counterpart to the HELP committee in the Senate is the Education and Labor Committee. This has also been known as Education and Workforce. It is currently titled Education and Labor. It has two relevant subcommittees to us: early childhood, elementary, and secondary education, as well as higher education and workforce development. They also have jurisdiction over education and workforce matters, including CCDBG and Head Start, as well as higher ed. So these two are super important. We also care a lot about not only what programs exist and what kind of policies they contain, but also how they are funded. That means that we care a lot about committees such as the Budget Committee, which is called the same in both the House and the Senate. It is the Budget Committee, which is responsible for writing the overall budget and framework. It sets the overall spending limits, and we care a lot about those overall spending limits, but it does not set funding levels for specific programs. That job falls to the Appropriations Committee, also named the same in both the House and the Senate. The Appropriations Committee is the largest committee in the U.S. Senate and in the House. It controls the discretionary spending for the federal government. Basically, that means every year they decide how much money is going to be spent where and on what. We will talk much more about this process, how funding works in Congress at public policy forums. Martha Coven will be joining us. If you've been with us in the past, she is a phenom at being able to explain this in ways that make it clear to everybody how this process works. So look forward to that. It's the greatest presentation on budget and appropriations. Get excited. We also care a lot about the Finance Committee. So how is all of this funded? So we have the programs and the policies, how we want to spend it, and where the money comes from. That question comes from the committee called Finance in the Senate and Ways and Means in the House. Same jurisdiction area, generally speaking. They're responsible for taxes and revenue. They are also responsible for the mandatory funding for CCDBG, which is part of how the Child Care and Development Block Grant is funded. They oversee programs, including some of the ones we just talked about, Medicaid, CHIP, and TANF. So all of these fall under the jurisdiction of the Finance and Ways and Means Committee. In addition to committees in Congress, Congress has many things called caucuses. So a caucus is a group of members who are committed to certain sort of themes, basically. They include, a lot of you have heard or may have heard about things like the Congressional Black Caucus, there's a Congressional Baby Caucus, there's the Congressional Pre-K Caucus. There are lots of different sort of caucuses for the members to get together on issues that they care about. And that provides you an opening. If you know that your member is a member of one of these caucuses, that's a great way to come at the conversation. If we know that they're part of the Pre-K Caucus, this is something that they care about, and you can talk about it with them from that angle. Very briefly, there is another branch of government, not just Congress. There are agencies who are responsible for a whole bunch of the implementation of the legislation and the work. There's the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. They hold the majority of the funding and oversight for programs supporting young children and families. Within HHS, we have the Administration for Children and Families, ACF, and that holds a whole bunch of offices, including things like the Office of Child Care, OCC, and the Office of Head Start. In addition, we also have the U.S. Department of Education. This is ED, the Department of Ed. It is not DOE. DOE is energy. In your states, a lot of times, Department of Education is DOE. Not true at the federal level. Department of Education is Department of Ed. It holds the majority of federal funding and oversight for K-12 and higher education. Office of Management and Budget is OMB. Sure, you can make a lot of OMG jokes, but we're going to go with OMB. It creates the president's budget and reviews all regulations. So when you hear us talk about child care regulations or Head Start regulations, all of that goes through OMB. All of these different sort of pieces of the acronyms, like you're going to learn a lot of it. You're going to get to know a lot of these pieces. The truth is that your advocacy, your story matters enormously as you come to prepare for the policy forum. It isn't just knowing all of the acronyms. One of the things that you can do to help get ready is to find out about the perspectives of your elected officials on these issues. Some of you are setting up your Hill meetings. We're setting up a lot of your Hill meetings. We encourage you to read their bios to get a sense of their personal and professional experience, especially for the ones who represent you when you're in their district. Identify opportunities to make that personal connection. Do they have young children? There are more this year than ever before. Representatives who are serving you who have their own young kids. That provides them with a whole new perspective perspective on what it means to invest in childcare and early learning. Many of them are grandparents who are seeing their children deal with these issues as well, and also providing them with a whole new perspective. We encourage you to look through their website and social media posts. We will include all of their Twitter handles for you guys as you come to Policy Forum so that you'll be able to tweet at them. It's a very effective form of highlighting your issues with your elected officials. There are rules about how you engage with them on Twitter and what you ask them to do, so we will cover much of that. We also encourage you, as you're thinking about and swirling with all of the letters and acronyms and OMBs and OMGs and who does what, to prepare to really just remember to ground this in your own stories. What you can bring is to make it personal to the legislator with who you're meeting. You can identify the real life implications of the federal programs that provide the local context. This is not just about acronyms. This is about actual kids, actual families, and actual educators. And that is powerful and what you're here to remind them of. We encourage you to check out additional resources on America for Early Ed. This is a link. If you're on the slides, you can also go just to americaforearlyed.org. We have tons of resources for you, including some additional details on committees and acronyms and preparing for meetings, building your public policy knowledge, and building your advocacy skills via NAEYC and America for Early Ed. And please know that when you come to us at Public Policy Forum, we are going to make sure that you are prepared, supported, energized, that you have what you need for your day on the Hill. You're going to be all set. You're going to be ready. You're going to have everything you need. You're going to be with your friends and partners and colleagues from within your state and across. If you have any questions leading up, you can always email us at advocacy@naeyc.org. And we look forward to providing you with much more information, more resources, talking points, and supports for your day on the Hill and for our time together on Sunday and Monday at Policy Forum. This session is really just to get you oriented and acquainted with the general programs, the committees at that high level. So if you have questions, be prepared to bring them to Public Policy Forum. We'll make sure to answer everything then. We look forward to seeing you guys at the end of the month, and we can't wait to welcome you to the 2019 Public Policy Forum. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.